I want to thank Reddit user DeLank for coming up with this story. It was actually a comment posted in the I Am a Search and Rescue Officer for the U.S. Forest Service series. I've been following this series with interest. I've always walked and camped in woods, forests, mountains, and moorlands alone, on both sides of the Atlantic. It's a time to get my mind right. I've put up with the rest of humanity for 50 weeks of the year, so I want to get to a place where I see no one. I've been out in various wildernesses for most of my life. It's where I'm at home, day or night. The cities are, to me, far more dangerous. Odd stuff does happen, though. I've had my share. Long time back, I was walking through the local woodland at night. This is a patch of ancient woodland. I heard a creaking sound, like one tree branch rubbing on another. Now this was weird enough for the hair on the back of my head to go up, because there wasn't a breath of wind, not even a breeze to stir the ash tree leaves. It was coming from the region of the old badger set. I circled around to the site, but saw and heard nothing. There was a feeling of depthless misery and fear that grew stronger as I got nearer. And the wrongness of one tree bough rubbing on another without anything to cause it was causing my instincts to suggest leaving well alone. So I left well alone for that night. Next day, I had a chat with the gamekeeper. He's an old guy in his 60s, and has been teaching me everything he knows since I was 11 to 12. Woodcraft, poaching, such as illegal subsistence, hunting for the pot, and various other bits of rural skills. He knew I'd go poaching on this patch, eventually, and told me, "You know it's my job to catch you," with the subtext of, "But I'd be disappointed if I do." It's finishing school, if you like. He reckons you can't really learn this stuff unless you've got something to lose. In his case, it was his liberty when he was a young man poaching for the pot, before he became a gamekeeper like his father. Later, it was his life at stake when he was hunting the Japanese through the jungles of southern Asia. He's good. He's very good. For most people, first you'd know he was there would be if you turned around and found him standing there, as if he'd come up through the ground. So we spent my formative years playing cat and mouse. I'm out hunting for game, while he's hunting for me. And yes, he really is trying to catch me. It's my job not to get caught, and to get some game for the pot. No, he never caught me. Sometimes I practice by walking behind some folks walking through the woods, 5 or 6 feet, before turning off to another path. They never notice me. Other times I sit silently by the side of a path as folks go by, scaring the local wildlife past me. They don't know I'm there. As I recently remarked to my daughter, who is now learning this stuff, most people go through the woods and through life as if they've got a letterbox in front of their eyes. They're blind to everything above, below, and to the sides of that letterbox, as well as deaf and unaware of what's behind them. They're only half alive. For good measure, their thoughts are on something in the past, or on what they'll do, what they want, what might happen in the future, but never in the now. They get to the ends of their lives, never having lived them to the full. And that's how I spend most of my time after school, weekends, and holidays, for about 10 years, just learning and practicing. Anyway, it turned out a young woman had hanged herself there the previous week. She tied a rope around a bough, stood on a stump, and jumped off. It wasn't an easy death. The rope was just too long, the branch too flexible, and her toes were in contact with the ground. She took hours to die. rising and falling on her toes as she slowly strangled, until her strength gave up and her sagging body weight did the rest. The scuff marks on the ground showed how she'd struggled as she hung and gyrated there, the branch rubbing against one that it crossed. The gamekeeper found her far too late and had to cut her down. I went back there that night. The feeling of misery and fear was just as strong. I sat down and offered to help, and offered a blessing for her, something my mother taught me. It's an old tradition in her family, and something that she herself was taught. There were no problems after that. We had a night escape and evasion exercise in the Forest of Dean. The Forest of Dean is an ancient forest, a relic of the forest that covered this land when the glaciers retreated. It's an old landscape with an old pagan temple at Libni. I suspect that the whole of this area, from the ancient forest right down to the temple of Aqua Solis at Bath, was once considered a strange and sacred landscape. Anyway, I got sent to watch for the hunters because of my prior experiences as a poacher. So there's me, crouching in shadow, the moon breaking through the clouds, watching, waiting for the signal to start the exercise, watching, waiting for the hunters, and just becoming one with the woods, mentally blending into it, alert and not thinking, aware of an owl in the tree above me, the patterns of light and dark, and the gentle wind. I was just another animal in the forest, both hunter and hunted. Well, this is just natural for me. As I crouched there, I became aware of a blue light behind the trunk of an oak tree to my left. As I watched, it grew stronger until a patch of light emerged where the branches forked from the trunk. Then it came down my side. Best I can describe it as a lizard about 4 to 5 feet long, made of blue light. I watched with interest. I'd vaguely heard of such things, and they're not known to be friendly to human beings. However, I was just another animal in the woods. I also knew that it meant that the hunters were not close. I watched. Suddenly its head perked up, and it looked off into the forest. Then it went out, like someone turning out a light. At the same time, I felt the presence of the hunters, maybe 100 yards off. I reported back to the guy in charge of our team that the hunters were closing in. The guy in charge, an officer in the green jackets, proved to be useless at this. 2 of our number just disappeared. The hunters got them. No noise, no sight of them. Eventually, with the team getting panic-stricken, he turned to me and said, "Can you get us out of this?" So I did. The hunters were good, but I'd had a top-notch teacher, and I'd been at this since I was 11 to 12. Even so, I had to be on my toes. They were the best I've come across. We didn't lose anyone else, though. I even considered ambushing the hunters, on the grounds that they now had no idea where we were. But I knew where they were. I could feel them. The rest of the team didn't feel up to this, though, so we settled for simply heading to our allocated destination. I figured that the hunters, having lost our trail, would try to get ahead of us and ambush us near where they knew we had to go. It's what I'd do. We therefore had to aim for working around them. We were now an hour or 2 into the exercise when there was an almighty scream from someone in one of the other teams further over in the forest. My first thought was, oh God, someone's got hurt. The signal went to call in all teams. Exercise aborted. We all headed back. They dragged the guy into a ring of headlights. I'll always remember the scene. He lay on the floor, in the fetal position, whimpering and shaking. I recognized him. A 20-year-old man in the Royal Marines. tours of duty in Ulster, active service in the Falklands, that sort of thing. He's known as a solid man, lots of combat experience. Now he lay on the floor, not physically hurt, whimpering inarticulately and shaking, obviously terrified. It took something like half an hour before we got anything other than animal-like whimpering out of him. It was a good hour before we got him on his feet with 2 guys supporting him walking as if his legs couldn't take his weight, and sat him down in one of the cars. He was white and still shaking. Unless I miss my guess, he was mentally scarred for life, possibly even broken. Someone passed him a coffee, and he gulped it down. Someone else passed him a cigarette. He had great difficulty lighting it because his hands were shaking so much, so someone helped him. They tried to get out of him what had happened. All he'd say was that he'd seen something. They tried pushing to find out just what it was that he'd seen. He just shook his head. I kept my peace and drank me coffee, but I had a good idea what it was that he'd seen. Like I said, they don't like human beings. Partly, I figured that no one would believe me. Then again, there was the possibility that, right then and there, they might well, at which point there might be panic. The exercise was supposed to go on for several more hours, but that was it. Folks, well, apart from me, were a bit rattled. You've never seen folks get into cars so quickly and leave, whilst trying to put on an air of everything being alright. Sometime later, I mentioned what had happened to one of the locals. They went a bit quiet, then remarked, "We don't bother them, and they don't bother us. It does no good to ask what they are." Why didn't it go for me? I guess that mentally, I was just another animal in the woods. No different in mindset to a fox or a cat. You don't pay animals much mind.